Hi, Gear. How are you?
Rachel, how you doing?
Good. So to start, the I love the kind of quirkiness that especially Joe Keery's character has because it is like this poor man just gets thrown into a mess. Uh,
Yeah.
for you, what was the fun of getting to play with that humor in the midst of like a kind of detective story at the same time?
Yeah, I mean, I've always been drawn to things that are tonally in this style, obviously, I guess. So it was kind of my take on that, or sort of, my love letter to all the films in the past that have had this sort of like whimsical, quirky sort of style. I think, as an actor, primarily for the last like 20 plus years, it's I've always tried to find the comedy, even in dramas, like I think there's comedy in everyday life. So that was part of it here too, was like, it's not necessarily a comedy, but I wanted it to have that sort of offbeat kind of kilter to it. So that was it was so great like collaborating with Joe and the rest of the cast to kind of find the moments where we can really drive the characters to find that sort of like quirky humor in it all.
And does that help you in your directing kind of coming from a acting standpoint?
Yeah, big time, big time. I mean, on many different levels. I mean, one is that I had never directed before this, but I had been on so many sets in my life as an actor. So, I knew what different departments did. I just had never been the conductor before, right? So, that felt very second nature. I've also worked with so many different directors, right? From legends like Clint Eastwood all the way to first timers. So, I had picked up little tidbits along the way of things that worked for me or things that I picked up of how they construct their days and how they, work with different actors or different crews. So yeah, that was a huge advantage. And then the other part of it was like I've worked with so many different actors who I've seen them have different processes, right? So that was very second nature that I was able to work with with the actors on Marmalade and figure out their processes quite quickly. And what worked for one actor is not going to work for another. So it's really sort of running with that.
Yeah, and like I mean, you're not a stranger to either genre, like as an actor, because
Right, right.
you just did Ambulance, then you also have like Wedding Crashers famously. So you have that comedy and you have that action. But I do also like how for a lot of this movie, the relationship between Joe Carey and Aldous Hodge's characters are very contained to kind of either their jail cell or just like common areas in the jail. When you're working with actors that it is such a contained space and they don't really have that room to grow, what is kind of your approach to getting those emotions in that relationship across on screen when it's the setting is just kind of limited?
Yeah, it was like, I mean, especially that stuff with Joe and Aldous. I was like, I asked them, do you guys want to rehearse? And they were kind of like, I don't know, I don't think so, and I was like, great, because I think if we just get in there, they knew their characters so well. And they were so prepared that it was kind of like, okay, let's just find things spontaneously. And that's exactly what happened. So it was, I mean, so many of these things live or die on the chemistry of characters, right? Of actors. And you don't really know until you're there on set. You can rehearse all you want, you can talk it out to death, but it's like, is that just innate chemistry going to be there? And luckily with those guys, it was the same with Joe and Camilla, with Baron and Marmalade. It was like, I got very lucky that these guys had done their homework and that their characters had the appropriate chemistry. That was like we could just sort of at that point, play around with it and decide how much we wanted to amp it up or not.
And speaking of Marmalade, I do love that like she has the ability of becoming that like kind of manic pixie-esque character,
Right.
but she doesn't
Yeah.
because she is just as weird as him. And I do love that kind of spawns that relationship throughout this movie. When you were casting, was that always something you guys were trying to make sure you didn't fall into?
I mean, yes and no, right? Like the script by design is I'm like, I'm gonna write these three sort of stereotypical quintessential tropes, right? You've got the manic pixie dream girl, you've got the like, inmate, and then you've got the small town naive guy, right? So the more I realized, the more that I didn't try to go away from that, the more that I played into that was exactly where we wanted the audience. We'll pull them along on this, like, oh, I think I've seen this before. And then right when you think you're getting ahead of the film, we run in the other direction. So yes, part of that was like, okay, let's play into this kind of manic pixie dream girl with Marmalade, but also let's have her be a little bit more dangerous and sort of, electric, and also then find the moments where there's a real vulnerability there. And but as long as she is pulling Baron along the story, and then in turn she's pulling the audience in a certain direction, and that is by design, that we want her to say, look this way, as the old magician's trick where you're like, look over here, as they steal your watch behind your back.
Yeah, when I do love, the what you said about like making the trip so obvious because like I was watching all this and I was like, man, this feels like such a tropey dude.
Right.
To like his
Yeah.
partner making fun of him because she's like, why did you like what in the world are you doing? And it was fun to kind of have that voice within the movie being like, you're making yourself look like a fool. Why are you saying these things? When you
Yes.
have those elements of comedy and that fun with like characters that just pop in randomly and kind of call out what's going on, what for you as a director is the most interesting way of kind of bringing that to life on screen? Like, I obviously this movie does that, but how did you approach making that kind of come to life?
Yeah, I mean, without giving anything away, right? With the script, there are like a lot of twists and turns,
Mhm.
as you've seen. But it was always kind of towing that line of like, we don't want to give anything away too
Mhm.
early, but we do want to guide the audience in a certain direction, and then maybe give them a couple breadcrumbs of like, wait a minute, is she manipulating him? I don't know if I like her. I do like her. Wait, does he like her, or is he manipulating her? Like, so it was always that. And then with Aldous as well, it's kind of like, is he staying true to his word? Who is he? What is happening? So that was the fun, and that was the challenge, right? With the actors, is knowing exactly their lane, but then also being like, I think that we can kind of wink a little bit here, or we can sort of misdirect a little bit more. Um, as long as, I was lucky enough with the script when I first sent it out, I was like, I don't know if these twists and turns are working. And they did. I could tell. So then, bringing it to life, it was like in the edit, some of the edits early on that we had, people were like, it's too obvious, this and that early on. So you're like, okay, I got to recut this scene to make sure that it's not, we're not giving anything away too early.
Was were you ever like overwhelmed by like trying to keep those secrets? Because I know like the important time things in movies there's like when those twists really hit, but
Yeah. Yeah.
obviously not easy to kind of
Yeah,
execute.
no, exactly. I mean, to be honest, I was a little bit out to sea because I was like, we had many different takes where we're like, sometimes I'm like, I think that's too obvious. Let's pull that back a little bit, or, like, let's go a little further. So I had some different options when I went into the edit. And then it was just about being like, ooh, this is nice in this scene. I think again, it's very fun to rewatch the film. I'll say that once you know the whole tale, because you get to see some instances where we really like kind of pushed it, and it's a little bit more like, oh my God, I see what he's doing right there now that the whole backstory.
And I do think too, like one of my favorite moments is when Marmalade is they're trying to like steal the masks and she
Yeah.
starts screaming at this employee in like an antique store. Just
Yeah.
like, yeah, I've been in an antique store. I know that guy was like, I don't know what you're asking me to do.
Yeah. And especially with like a character like his, you know what I mean? It's the juxtaposition of like, that is kind of like his worst nightmare, of like horrifying, of like disrupting any sort of like quiet moment. It's like perfect. Just
Yeah,
put
but
two like,
yeah, but with things like that, where it is like that is kind of the switch we see in her, but it is played for comedy. What
hmm.
was your like approach to like making sure that that stuff kind of hit? Because it's funny because it's so not what we've been watching her do throughout the whole movie.
Yeah, but hopefully like relatable in some sense too.
Mhm.
Like dated someone like that, or you've seen a couple like that, or you've seen someone in the world, or you're like, my uncle's like that, or my aunt or something. It's like we had to find some sort of like grounding reality to, of course, these people, these characters are made up from my imagination, but they're different pieces of people I've met along the way, or different pieces of myself, right? So
Mhm.
it's making sure that you're always like playing into like the reality and sort of like perhaps the fear of certain situations or the hilariousness of certain situations, things that I find funny or scary or sincere or sweet or kind of escapist. So it is always just making sure that everybody knows the exact sort of intention of each scene as we go.
And for you, like, I mean, the heart of this is sadly about this man just trying to kind of like take care of his mom and save his mom. For you, was it always important to kind of ground Baron Joe Keery's character in that reality that, like, as weird as he is and as out there
Yeah.
as he is, it is all just about his mom?
Yeah, totally. I mean, that's it, right? It's like there's I think as the story goes, you question certain elements and certainly by the end, I think just like any sort of retelling of a tale, you kind of look back and you're like, what pieces of that were true and what was fabricated? But the heart of that is something that I wanted to make sure like delivered and was like a real sincere thing that people could walk away from of like it is about that, right? So
Mhm.
um yeah, that was always like super important to me and to Joe, and making sure that those moments felt very real.
And I mean, he is a man that we meet first losing his job because he just won't cut his hair.
Mm.
And for you, what was your favorite moment to kind of like actually get to create and bring to life in a movie that you felt was like, they're surely not gonna let me do this?
I mean, all of it. I'll say all of it. I mean, I will give you an example, but like I was pinching myself daily, being like, oh my God, they're like, I can't believe these actors are like saying these words of, it's just so insanely surreal, and everything's like this bizarre dream because you've created these worlds and you see it in a certain way. Of course, it's not going to line up exactly with that, but it's like a weird dreamlike version of that you're watching every day, going like, my God, yeah, that's kind of like what I imagined, but a little bit weirder. It's like a dream where you're like, and you were there, but it wasn't you. You know what I mean? But I think the salsa dancing sequence was sort of my favorite. That was an early image that I'd come up with, and that stayed pretty true to how we shot it. And so that was a fun night, and that it delivered for sure.
Yeah, I 100% agree. I can't wait for people to get to see Marmalade. I think it's very fun.
Yeah.
And thank you so much for talking with me today. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, thanks.
Thank you. Have a great one.
Thanks, you too.